Gemara. We are up to now the third and final Pedic of Masechta Horayos. This Pedic actually have a little bit of Agadah to it. It's quite an interesting Pedic, but some of it we already had in Masechta Nazir Daf like Beis Chaf Gimel. If you remember, it's been a while ago, but you remember. Okay, we are up to now the third Pedic. Let's begin. We're continuing just a little bit with the Kohen Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, and the Nasi and the Melech. The Kohen Gadol brings a different carbon. Not only brings a different carbon than everybody else, he brings a par versus everyone else brings a lamb or a sheep. But also, he only brings a carbon chatas if he also rules to himself that is permitted. A Melech always brings a brings a carbon chatas. However, he doesn't have to rule, but he brings a different kind of an animal. He brings only a goat. He doesn't have the option of a lamb or a goat. Says the Mishnah. Things which will be quite obvious, or we think so, but we'll see. Kohen Mashiach, a Kohen Gadol, have test on the base on the bottom of the page. Kohen Mashiach, a Kohen Gadol, shechata, that sinned. The achekach obamim shichase. Before he had a chance to bring his special carbon, he was no longer a Kohen Gadol. What happened was that he was something happened to Mum. Another Kohen took his place. So what happens then? V'chein Nasi, likewise a Nasi, shechata who sinned. And va'achekach ova migdulase, a nasi which you said before, he's a king. We'll see later on, and then afterwards he was no longer a king, and we'll see later how he loses his kingship. Is Kohen Mashiach maybe par? If we focus on the time when he sinned. If he sinned while he was a Kohen Gadol, that's the kind of carbon he brings. If he sinned while he was a king, that's the kind of carbon he brings. Maybe par. He brings a par like a Kohen Gadol. The Hanasi, and the Nasi may be seared because he sinned at the time when he was a king or a Kohen Gadol. What about he sinned the Chatchila after he was no longer the Kohen Gadol? Mashiach she'abra mem shichase. The achekach he sinned afterwards, or the Nasi or a king when he was no longer a king. Then he sinned. The achekach is Kohen Mashiach. Here we have an interesting difference. A Kohen Mashiach is maybe part. He's always the Kohen Gadol, even when he's not serving the Kohen Gadol, he's always the Kohen Gadol. and the Hanasi beheaded. But a Kohen Gadol, the Kedusha remains forever. Mashen Kain, a Nasi, once he's no longer king, he's no longer king. So he back to Hedjed, he brings the same kabbalah like an ordinary person. Says the Gemara, now that you told me that a Kohen Gadol is Shleim. You tell me right now that a Kohen Gadol, who after he was no longer Kohen Gadol, he's no longer acting as a Kohen Gadol, still remains a Kohen Gadol. The Aga may be par, and yet you tell me that Chotev, but if he sinned, and the Achikach of Meshachas Madach, you tell me that if he sinned after he was no longer Kohen Gadol, acting Kohen Gadol, he brings the carbon of a Kohen Gadol. So surely if he sinned while he was a Kohen Gadol, surely he brings the carbon of a Kohen Gadol. But the Mishnah can tell you. So you're right, we don't have to. It's just a segue from Nasi. By Nasi, there is a difference. By Nasi, the Chiyavim is going to say, by a Nasi, once he's no longer a Nasi, then he sinned. By a Nasi, once, if he sinned after he was no longer a king, he is an ordinary person. So by him, we need to tell you, but if he sinned while he was a king, and then he's ready to bring a carbon, his own king, then in that case, he brings it like a king. So by a Nasi, you had to tell us, because there's a difference. And once you tell by Nasi, he also mentioned by Kohen Gadol, even though it was totally redundant. Maybe par. How do we talk know this? So what do we learn? It says that he should bring on his chatos melamed maybe chatos. You bring a chatos for what? For sinning. And since he sinned when he was a Kohen Gadol, so therefore you bring a chatos even though you bringing it by the time you're no longer Kohen Gadol. Melamed, so you know, but he still has the same thing as Kohen Gadol. Melamed shemei v'chatos and misha over. Sheyachal, I would have thought. Why do you need a pasuk for? Because I would have thought, but it didn't make sense. Madach nasi shemei b'shgagas mashigas ma'isa. Ein maybe chatos and misha over. I would have thought. I would have thought that a nasi who does not, he brings very easily. He brings a carbon. He doesn't have to paskin. He doesn't have a mistake. He brings a carbon. And yet, if he made the chatos, but if he sinned after, he was no longer king. he no longer brings that kind of a chatz of a king. Is Mashiach, which is much more difficult to get him to bring a carbon. He only brings a carbon if he first ruled that it's mutter, and then maybe you can say he has to first rule. Is like koshkein. So surely I would have thought that he should be like a king, and not. And if he sinned afterwards, he's no longer chayiv. Tamalay maybe he could al chatose melamed shemaybe al chatose misha'aber. Comes to teach you that he brings a chatas even after, if he sinned, if he's no longer acting king, he still what? He still has to bring a carbon like a kohen gadol. Says the Gemara, "V'naisi." Why don't Nami Nosi Mekabachem? So now that we've established by a Kohen Gadol that he brings, if he sinned after he's no longer a Kohen Gadol, he still brings a carbon like a Kohen Gadol. So now let's learn the other way around. Then surely Nasi should be the same thing. Uma Mashiach. Maybe it's much more difficult for him to bring a carbon generally because he doesn't bring if he makes a mistake unless he ruled. Yet maybe Chatas Misha'ava, but if after he's no longer Kohen Gadol, he still continues behaving that way that he brings the Chatas Kohen Gadol. So Nasi should maybe Chatas B'Shikis Ma'isa. Nasi much readily brings a carbon. Ain't it in surely should maybe Chatas Misha'ava. Should bring a Chatas once that even he's no longer a king. He should still be treated like a king. Only while he was a nasi. If he sinned, does he bring the carbon of a nasi? So we have a pasuk by a nasi, we have a pasuk by a kohen gadol. What about if they sinned prior to becoming kohen gadol or prior to being appointed as a king?
Before they can do it, carbon.
Yeah, and then they found out that then they became king. Yeah, what happens then? So the Mishnah, is in Mishnah. We had this already up Shimon before. So the Mishnah, actually this man, he sinned before he became a king. This man then became a king. And God will look at you. Focus on the time that you sin. Just like before we focus the time of the sin. So today we focus on the time that you sin. They sinned when they were a hedyot, treat them like a hedyot. Rab Shimon says it's not enough the time.
Sorry, but basically we're on Daf Yudam and Aleph. I'll summarize it. So basically what we're learning here is that a kohen that sinned before he appointed as a kohen or a king, before a king, they committed a sin that treated like an ordinary person. According to Reb Shimon, it's not just enough when they sinned before they were a king, but they actually had to sin and become aware that they became that he sinned before he became a kohen gadol or a king. Only then do you bring the carbon of a hedyot. But if he didn't find out until he became a king or a kohen gadol that he sinned, then you don't bring any carbon. You cannot bring the carbon of an ordinary person because you only found out when you're a king. You cannot, or a kohen gadol. You cannot bring the carbon of a kohen gadol because you didn't sin when you were a kohen gadol. So you're in a limbo. You don't do anything at all. And the Gemara brought the pasuk how we know because it says Asher by a nasi. It says Asher yechter that the nasi Asher nasi yechter. That only when he sinned after he was a nasi do we have these dinim. And the saying by kohen says im. But only im a kohen if the kohen Mashiach will sin yechter. Only once they became a kohen do these dinim apply. So now the Gemara is talking about Asher nasi yechter. Sounds like the nasi definitely is going to sin, and as if the Eibush decreed that power corrupts and leaders have to sin. Where do you where does that come from? So therefore, the Gemara says over here now that that it could be the Eibishter made a gzera. We find like the Eibishter made leprosy in houses. It's a bad thing, and yet the Eibishter decreed. Same thing here, the Eibishter decreed. So up to the Gemara over here, about 10 lines on the bottom of the page, and we're saying here that we have a pasuk that we'll stop here. But Tanya, we learned about 10 lines on the page. Didn't we learn? Rab Shimon said that the Eibishter said it's not a bad thing. The Eibishter is saying, "You teach you, Nasati, I made tsaras in your houses. I'm not telling you to create bad things. What I'm telling you is that only if I made the tsaras, but if it came through other means, it was an accident, something else, then it does not become tsaras." We're asking a question: when a person becomes a tsaras, it says that only takes place. What's here? But Tanya, we learned. When a person has tsaras, it makes sense. That when a person is tummy has emissions and a tummy by leprosy. Just like emissions, only time that it becomes tummy is if it took place post Matan Torah. So too by leprosy is only post Matan Torah. That's what we. So what I need a pasuk to tell me by a leprosy, it only takes place post Matan Torah. I automatically would have said that, just like by yourself. All dinim of tumah take place. Anything these negative things only take place after Matan Torah. If you were a leper before, doesn't matter. So you said, no. I would have thought Imam Bezav should get ein mitame ba'inus. By Azav, you don't become tummy. If you jumped up and down and caused it to have a mission, that doesn't count. Become leprosy. You are mitame even if it's ba'inus. So what Rabbi Shimon says that you don't become tummy when a sati nega means to tell you that if you became tummy through an einus, tzaras or einus doesn't count. When he says clearly you do. Right here. But the goyim, that's why we need a pasuk that only post Matan Torah. Only afterwards. The Rabbi answers, "Pratl nige ruch." You know what nige einus means? If it was brought through spirits. That somebody made witchcraft. No, it's not. The different kind of oin. I don't know. You jumped up and down. These kind of things. The einus that somebody else, outsider, made it happen. The Gemara clearly equates leprosy that's on the person and leprosy that's on the house. Even though when the Medrash here, it sounds like on the person because you spoke Lashon Hara. On the house, it was a psura toiva because you want to find the treasures of their moirim who were here hiding in the walls. But yet our Gemara here, where's the? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was the sign. Exactly. That's what's like our Gemara here. Yeah, exactly. What I learned. If he was sick, should have if he's a sick person, he's no longer king. He's no longer king because he's sick. It comes an exception if a king has leprosy. You know, it says that the king who decided to bring Azariah, he decided to bring a Titus on the Mizbeach, he got punished. He became a leper the rest of his house, the rest of his time. By Yoshev Beis HaChavshis, and he sat now house free. He was no longer king. He removed the responsibility of a king. And the Yosef ben Melech Alabais, and his son Yosem, he took over all the reins of leadership. So we see what. You're leper, you're no longer a king. Even though before we learned that if you're a leper, you don't have to bring a carbon oil of the Yedid because you're still a rich person and you don't have the option of being very poor. Just because you're no longer the king, you still have all the money that you amassed. But Rashi wants to say that this Gemara argues. Others trying to say two different things. That's carbon oil of the Yedid. Here we're talking about the dinim of a carbon that only a king brings. That's what we'll learn Gemara. That we're going to learn Gemara Erchin and all that. Interesting questions. You started out being poor and then you became rich, or rich and became poor. What kind of carbon do you bring? Taking much further, the base he came now free. Because he was a king and he was considered a slave. What do you mean? Most says yes. Have you also been one traveling on a boat? He had bread. And Bishua was very poor. He had bread and he had flour. In other words, in case in the future it'll be a long trip, he'll have flour. Shalom Peter ran out of bread. He was a rich man, but he ran out of bread. He had to sustain himself on the flour of Yeshua. Let me have a yada to have on the kubical. How in the world did you know to prepare yourself? It's a short trip from Etzol to Rome, wherever they were going. How did you know to prepare all these flour? There's one star. They say this is over Haley's comet. There's a certain boats, ships used to travel based on the stars. But this comet used to rise and then confused all the sailors because they didn't know on the right side. They didn't know what kind of star it is. They didn't know where to go. He knew about the Haley's comet. It only comes up once every 70 years. But Marty and I said, maybe it will come up and it will confuse us. Good question. You're such a smart, wise person, and you have to never schlep on the ship there try to fundraise. You worry about me. At least I can make somehow my ends meet. You have two students. You have two students on the dry land. They're so smart. They know how to calculate how many drops there are in the Atlantic Ocean. And the Rebbe in the Rishimis has a whole calculation of what it is, and what it going means here. They're so smart. And page passing lechem, nothing like begalibush. They're not close to where. Nothing daitel shivim berosh. She decided, you know what? I will make them lead. I'm decided. Wow, I'll make them leaders. And Rashi says, I'll make them rabbis, and they'll have a good wage, and they'll have a panasa. The Rosh says, since when does rabbis have a good wage? It means just become rabbis, at least get covered something. Kisha Shalach lehem, he sent for them, but like, they didn't want to come. Chazav v'shalach, he sent them again, they came. You don't want to come because you want to be, decline because you want to be a low key. You should not. You think sarados ani nois lechem? You think a rabbi is a covered and leadership? Abdus ani nois lechem. I'm giving you here a rabbi, a leader of the community, is the servant of the people. Today, he told Rechavam, today you're going to be an Eved to the people. The Mashah, a beautiful Mashah here. Just quickly tell you the Mashah here. He said, what's this whole story about going on the ship? Gamil also was on the ship. And that's how you make Panasa. What do you want from Yeshua? And Gamil was on the ship for Panasa. So he said, you're going on the ship to make Panasa. And he said, no. And why didn't the Bishur bring flour? He said this whole allegory. A ship is a marshal for Golis, because the ship rocks back and forth all the time, and Golis will never feel stable. One day you think you're secure, the next minute suddenly you find out that all the people living around you hate you, and there's a antipathy towards Eden. So you're in a ship. So he said, and also in the ship at that time, Yoshka was just started religion. A lot of Jews followed Christianity. So they knew that in Golis they'll always be confronted and debates, and why don't you join us, embrace our society? So Gamliel, he had lechem, the big Talmud Chacham. He had the Torah. Rabbi Yeshua not only had lechem, the Torah, but he also had common knowledge. He had secular knowledge. He had flour. Flour is nothing like bread, which is the final product, which is what Torah is like compared to bread, but he had a lot of flour. Rabbi Gamliel went and started having debates with these people. Oh, 70 years. Person lived 70 years, and this guy became a star, and he became the leader, and everybody started to follow Yoshka. And Rabbi Gamliel thought with Torah he could debate everybody. Rabbi Yeshua was a lot smarter than that. He also had soilers. He had the flour. He knew how to argue with them, and we'll have the Gemara B'chaydos. He knew how to argue with them and in secular things as well. And then he said, and then he said to Gamliel, and Gamliel realized that Torah alone is not going to do it. And he said to Rabbi Yeshua, "You're so smart." Rabbi Yeshua said, "You think I'm smart?" He said, "Rabbi Yeshua, you're so smart. How come you wanted Zakai to tell the king of Rome, that you shouldn't destroy Yerushalayim at that time? Why you having and why Yerushalayim during the Churban Beis Hasheni?" He said, "You think I'm smart? You should see these two other Tanoim. They're much smarter than I am. They know not only the secular studies that you are the most common one, mainstream. They know everything about every trivia contest they would win, and they were there." And they couldn't convince Rechel Mazakai. So, what do you want from me? That's how he learns this whole story here. And let's continue. Probably learned Asher, Asher, you know why I said Asher? If it means maybe he'll sin, why say Asher? Praiseworthy generation that the Nasim, the leaders, are humble. So maybe carbon go say he brings a carbon when he makes a mistake. Even Nasi maybe carbon. If a Nasi brings a carbon and he says, "Look, I made a mistake," so surely ordinary people they'll use them as a role model. Sure, they're not as arrogant, not filled with hubris like a king. Surely they'll feel repentant if they did the wrong thing. If he does it by mistake. Surely, if he did it on purpose, then you realize he did it wrong. I mean, then he has trouble. Every time it says Hashem means he's praiseworthy. Let me ask you a question. It says if he stole from Hegdish, you have to pay. No, it says Asher. That means praiseworthy, the guy who stole from Hegdish. By Rabban Navat, the one who betrayed the king and he started his own the 10 tribes. Asher Chotav, Asher Hechti. That he sinned. What do you say? Praiseworthy that he sinned. That the praiseworthy generation that has such leaders corrupt. Shiny Hoch is different. The Shani Krabbe the Buri. By a coin says im. So why by Nossi says Asher when he really means if? To tell you praiseworthy. It says in Pasuk, it said there's this thing that happened in this ground that tzaddikim that they live like they get the reward of the Shaim, and the Rishonim they get the reward of tzaddikim. What does that mean? We have two opinions here. So Nachman says, "Yes, Ashrei tzaddikim." Now, the Rishonim in this world have a good life, but in the world to come, they get to Gehenim. Tzaddikim in this world, a lot of time they don't have a good life, so that they get punished for all their avedas, so they go straight to Gan Eden when they pass away. That's what it means here. Ashrei tzaddikim shemagi aleim k'ma'aser Rishonim. They get exactly what the Rishonim get in the world to come. Shalom haba b'lam hazeh. That they get Gehenim, and the tzaddikim sometimes suffer in this world, but that's for their benefit. Oilem to the Shoyim, also the Shoyim, Shemagil, Kamai Tzaddikim, Olam Haba. The Tzaddikim have a great time in Olam Haba, they have a Gan Eden, and then the Shoyim live in this world and have a great time. But then after that, for all the good deeds they did, they got rewarded, they go straight to Gehenim. Olam Haza. Omar Rava argues. He says, why can't Tzaddikim have a good time as well? Why do Tzaddikim have to suffer? Omar Rava, Otu Tzaddiki Yachli Trei Almi Misanil, is that a bad thing? El Omar Rava says Rava. Ashreyim letzadikim. The best thing is for tzadikim. Shemagilim k'ma'aser Hashem hazeh, b'olam hazeh. Have a good life in this world and in Gan Eden. And oilem l'rishayim shemagilim k'ma'aser tzadikim b'olam hazeh, b'olam hazeh. Or Rishayim that have a bad life here and bad life in the future. Fascinating machlek is Rashi in the Medrash beginning by Yeshiv. By Yeshiv Yaakov. So the Rashi says the comforts of Roiza shel Satan that Dayach that you can have, it's bad enough that you can have Gan Eden. So now that you have Gan Eden, you also want olam hazeh as well. Why should you have a good time? So one medrash says Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says it. You can't have both good time in both worlds. And the other one says Amar HaSatan. And that's exactly my chayk is here between Amnach Mechiz and the Rava. Whether a tzaddik can have a very nice life here as well. Like Rabbi HaKadosh. But even though he didn't have a good life because he suffered physically, he had a lot of sicknesses. And you want to prove this point. They came to Rav, so he asked them, did you learn this Gemara? You learned that Gemara? Yes. You have any parnasa? Yes, the Zabna and continued. We bought a piece of land and we have an income. He said to them, so you have a good life and you're learning. That they have a good life in this world, because Rav is of the opinion that tzaddikim should have a bracha in Gashim as well. Why should they have to suffer? And this Gemara here from now on is all we're having more nazar. We'll go a little bit quicker. That the ways of Hashem are straight, and tzaddikim will go in it. And sinners will stumble. Two people that they both roasted their corn pesach. One person ate it, had a mind of mitzvah. Another person ate it, he was full, and didn't have a mind of mitzvah at all. The same, they're both eating the same corn pesach. The one who did it for the right reasons, tzaddikim. Those who eat it, for them, no, they were stuffed. They didn't, and they weren't eating it for the same mitzvah at all. They just ate it for the sake of eating it. They consider Rishonim. Said Rasha Korishla Hakakol Rasha. He loved Mishal Mucha, didn't know ideal mitzvah Pesach, he hated Pesach. The Shagazai Yaturi even asked the question, what do you mean? But Rishlakish is the one who holds that mitzvahs need kavanah in Gemara Arib Sachim. No, so if he didn't have kavanah, he wasn't Yaitza. And he goes and he remains in Tzarchin. So that's what some people want to answer, but I never understood the question. Because if you remember, we learned that there are exceptions, even though we say it's kavanah, but just like by Vedas, we say, if you enjoy what you're eating, then enjoyment is tantamount to having kavanah. So the same thing here. Since he's eating the corn pesach, it's like he has kavanah. It's like he's exactly. So what he's saying here, Paisus in others says that two kinds of achila gasa. Because we're looking more human that if you ate achila gasa in kippah, it's not counted like you're breaking your fast. They're talking about you're so stuffed you can't even look at the food. I don't know if you ever reached the stage. And then you have people who are full. But that's what we're talking about. They're full, not talking about stuff. Exactly. But there's the degrees of fullness. Two people. The marshal is a person, a guy and his wife and his sister within his house. And this guy, he had his wife and his sister in the same house. The Baisech is Damli show in one house, he happened to meet his wife. The other one ended up by mistake, it was dark, and everything else, he ended up having a relationship with the sister. That's the tzaddik. Mefarshim asking, they don't understand. It's talking about his damna. It's totally not his fault. So what is this? A shoyim yechashlubam. So it is the answer. The fact that the Eibush allowed this to happen is because we said lo yu'unu l'tzadik kolavan, tzaddikim don't sin, and this guy ended up in the wrong room. That means already that proves not that he's the Rasha right now, that he always was a Rasha. He was a Rasha right before. The Gemara said, and like Yishai, he thought he was doing it with the shivcha, and ended up with his wife, and they had David Melech. So the Gemara, meet dummy. What? How can you learn that's from Pasuk? Anan coming in Chada, which they both did this exactly the same thing, and this guy ended up being a tzaddik in Russia. Derech v'hacha in two different cases, two different homes. Ela mashal, there's a mashal, a light shebe, a light, and there's two daughters. Ancient is kabbalah shem mitzvah. They thought they were the last people left in the world. They did it to mitzvah to continue mankind. Tzaddik yelchavan, the tzaddikim. Hushin is kabbalah shem alei the peishi chashavan. He's a sinner. How do you know? But the Hunashem is a maybe he also had in mind the sin mitzvah. The pasuk by light, the entire pasuk, every word in that pasuk is referring to incest. By Yisa light, tell the pasuk by Yisa light raised his eyes, and where do you find that expression? Vatisa Echadon. When Yosef's mistress wanted to have to seduce him, same word, Vatisa. Light raised his eyes, and we find by Shimshon. Every woman he saw, he wanted. He saw her, he wanted it. He shot a of Bayar, and then the light saw. He saw this place. He said, "I want to move away from this dome." Bayar, where do you see that? Bayar, it says, Bayar saw Dinah, and he lusted after her. As called Kikli Yarden, he saw this whole area Kikli Yarden. There's another pasuk that alludes to that. In the exchange of bread, he wanted a harlot. Kikula Mashka. Again, it's talking about over there, again, harlots, and they use the expression of drink. So every single word in the pasuk of light is referring to... is honest. He didn't know, he was drunk. So how can you call him Rasha? It says in the pasuk, he didn't know what was going on. Why by claiming there's a nukud on the vav? The older girl, when he went to sleep, he had no idea what's happening. When he woke up, he realized what happened last night. Yada. Talking about so what? That makes him Russia. He woke up and he knew. It's too late already. By the Hava. No, not Kamina for the next night. Why get drunk again? Yizuri, what happened to Lapanya China? Drank. That's why he's a Russia. It says in Pasik, it says, oh, Nifsha, that the brother, the relative, Nifsha, we rebelled, Mikirias Ois, from the city of strength. That's what we'll see Avram. Midyanim, and we'll see that Midyanim doesn't mean Midyan, but Midyanim means arguments, Kibriach Armin, like you lock the door. The light, that's light, Shepirish Mavram, separate Avram. Midyanim, Kibriach Armin, Shehitul Midyanim, Ben Yisrael. He made all these machleksim between Yisrael and Amash. Now it says, the Yahweh Amayim Moed Kal Hashem. The Amayim Moed cannot come to Hashem. And Bekitzer, see the girls who did it l'shem shemayim. The din is the girls from Ammon and Moav are allowed to marry into Eden. He who did not do l'shem shemayim, the men of Ammon and Moav. So he separated Ammon and Moav from Klal Yisrael. Just a few more lines. Dosh Rav asked a question. He wanted tithe before he became separated. The whole tushia, and in every strength, his gala, it was revealed. What's going on here? The tithe Yivakish to my light. Shenif from Avram. He separated from Avram because of his tithe. And the whole tushia, and every strength, his gal was revealed. Strength here means taita. Ain't tushia la taita. We had a and Shin's galam was revealed. Koloina his shame. Bebatik can see in shul where we learn taita, krisa taita, or bebatik we learn gemara. But now we learned amayim of us on Israel. In the Gemara it says it also forever. So we'll stop with continuing tomorrow, Mr.